Welcome back to my garden. Last week I was speaking about dieting, at least mentioned it. The truth is, it's certainly something that I sometimes view with a little bit of pride. Since moving to the northeast, I don't want to say I've won that battle, but not far off it. I've been here 8 years, and I'll let the facts speak for themselves. I arrived here, and quickly, in the first 6 months, I was getting married, and I'd just retired, and I was settling into a new sort of life and routine. And by the end of 2014, my weight had ballooned to no less than 110 kilograms. And recently, I tipped the scales at about 77. That's 33 kilograms or 70 pounds for a little bit more than 70 pounds for my imperial friends. Now, there's no arguing with that. That's a lot of weight loss. And of course, it's interesting because I can look at how that came about. And when people used to ask me, certainly in the first few years here, as the weight slowly dripped off, I'd say, well, it's the beer diet. And in a way, of course it wasn't a beer diet where that's all I had. But I was drinking beer on a quite regular basis whilst dieting. And I guess what happened, it's not that I suddenly started exercising on an unparalleled level, not at all. But I just have steadily started to eat less. I don't eat meals in the evening. I have a much healthier diet. And the last 3 years, which have really sort of featured, I guess, about half of that weight loss, it's been triggered by COVID-related matters. The lockdown changed my socializing, drinking habits, and changed how I work and when I eat, a whole host of things. But the upshot of it all is that I think I can say with some pride that I can speak with experience about losing weight, or as one might say, dieting. But mentioning dieting last week got me thinking about another sort of dieting, which has become very much a thing of our age, and that is the digital detox. Shortly after making the video, I received a couple of emails with people talking about this, but it's not the first time I've come across the idea, and it's spoken about a lot. I guess the standard bearer, or one of the standard bearers, is Cal Newport. If you're not familiar with Cal Newport, he is a computer science, theoretical computing professor at Georgetown University, and the author of a number of very successful books. Deep Work, So Good They Can't Ignore You, and recently Digital Minimalism. And his whole, I suppose, if you were to sum up with his ideas in a neat package, he's all in favour of working in a structured, focused way, creating spells where you really concentrate with seriousness. You work with depth on ideas that ultimately matter. He's not someone who is a great believer in social media and the values of email, or the way that a lot of modern business is conducted, the way a a lot of institutions structure themselves. And so he's definitely at the forefront of this argument. And he cited in the email I received, it's one of my many weekly newsletters, he cited some research in England, and he did point out that, look, it's solid research, but he hasn't checked it with enormous depth. It hasn't been repeated across the board, and it's obviously, in that sense, is a bit of a generalization. But what he'd read made a lot of sense and certainly fits in with his argument, so he repeated it. And the argument is this, that the university that conducted the research set up two groups, randomly selected, one that followed the program and the other that was a control group, and then they had some sort of measure. And the measure was of their mental well-being and how they felt about themselves and things like that. And what they did was a 2-week elimination of all forms of social media. And what they discovered in the research was quite conclusively that it had an enormous payoff in terms of feelings of well-being, of many mental health indicators, eliminating stress and depression. And this is obviously not suggesting that if you suffer from depression, the reason is simply to be, or the blame is to be put on the doorstep of Twitter. No, they're not suggesting that. But they are suggesting that the way we consume social media and these sort of electronic platforms is rather like the way we consume food. And too much food, too much calorie-rich food, is not a good thing. Now, I don't think there's anything controversial in saying that. It sort of makes intuitive sense. And of course there are people who need to consume that much calorie-rich food. I guess thinking in terms of digital food, if you are in the business of content creation and marketing, if that's at the heart of everything you do, well then you're going to be spending a lot of time looking at social media platforms, but it's going to be for a purpose and in a very controlled way. Rather like there are people who have enormous calorie-rich diets. I went through a phase when I got quite interested again in just catching up with the sort of world of the strongmen competitors. I mean, these guys have 10,000 calorie a day diets, but they need to because of the way they exercise. I actually, I met people like that. I trained in a gym, and in that sort of gym circuit, there was a guy, Gary Taylor, who won the World Strongman competition, and so there were people following those sort of diets. And I remember once actually, I was in South Africa visiting my brother, and we're at a braai, and a friend, I think a friend of his wife's or someone, showed up, and he was a South African sumo wrestler. Who'd have ever thought that such a thing even existed? But there he was, and the man was enormous. I mean, astonishing, the size. He was 150 kilograms, and there was a bit of blubber, as there so often is with these sumo guys, but he was obviously an incredibly strong man. And I think at that meal, he wolfed down a chicken without batting an eyelid, and he started talking about his diet, and it was absurd, but necessary if you wanted to be the size of a sumo wrestler and train to generate the strength of a sumo wrestler or a world powerlifting champion or a world strongman champion. Well, you guzzle in the calories. Well, that's a bit of a digression, but getting back to the point, most of us don't do sumo wrestling as a sport. And most of us don't need to consume 8 hours a day of social media. But here's the catch. I think just as many people are consuming far too much food, there's a reason why type 2 diabetes, why obesity is rife. There was a reason why I weighed 110 kilograms. It's because I ate too much food. There's no way of getting around that. I was just at the very heart of it. It wasn't just because I had big bones, as I like to tell friends when I was younger. It wasn't just because I was an athlete, because I wasn't anymore, 8 years ago. It was because I, was consuming more calories than I needed to burn in a day, and it just piled up. And that is what we're doing with our digital consumption. Okay, now I've sort of moved on into the final throes of this week's talk. What's the point of all this? The point of it is that I find myself thinking, can I take my rotation diet and adapt it, the same principles, for a sort of digital dieting, a kind of 21-day digital consumption rotation that will help at the beginning give a boost to the momentum that I need to just waste less time on sort of digital consumption that gives nothing to me in return. I'll just give one example before wrapping things up. The last week I found myself watching reruns of Dragon's Den. Why? What? For God's sake. There's just no call for it. But I was doing it. And I need to stop. It doesn't serve any purpose. Something that I could argue does serve a purpose is watching live broadcasts of chess tournaments. But at the moment, that time would be better spent, as it was 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, watching instructional videos, which are on some level interactive. And that's what I need to do. But to kind of get to that healthy stage, maybe some sort of digital equivalent of my rotation diet would be just the ticket. I'll keep you posted should there be positive further developments, or if I find in an interesting sample size case study of one that there are valuable lessons to be learned from something that I've tried. And until then, from a very pleasant Brazil, trust you're all well, and that's it for this week. So ciao.